More than 2,000 years ago, a man lived whose words still influence millions of people today. His name was Seneca, and what makes his story remarkable is not just what he taught, it is what he survived. Because Seneca did not learn wisdom in comfort. He learned it through adversity, through power, through loss, through danger, and through experiences that would have broken many people. Most know him as a Stoic philosopher. But he was much more than that. He was a writer, a statesman, an advisor, one of the most influential minds of the Roman world. And unlike many philosophers who spent their lives isolated from society, Seneca lived directly inside the center of political power. He understood ambition, he understood wealth, he understood human weakness, and he understood how easily people lose themselves while chasing success. Now think about this carefully. Many philosophers speak about life from a distance. Seneca lived inside its chaos. He experienced privilege and danger, recognition and exile, influence and uncertainty. And because of that, his writings feel surprisingly relevant even today. His lessons were not theoretical. They were practical. They came from real struggles, real fears, real challenges. This is one reason his words continue resonating across centuries. Because human nature has not changed very much. People still struggle with anxiety, still struggle with anger, still struggle with uncertainty, loss, ego, and distraction. And Seneca wrote extensively about all of these problems. Now pay attention to something important. Seneca believed that external circumstances do not determine the quality of life as much as people think. He argued that the mind often creates more suffering than reality itself, that fear of future events damages people long before those events ever happen, that anger destroys the person holding it, that chasing endless desires prevents inner peace, and perhaps most importantly, he believed time was life's most valuable resource. Not money, not status, not power, time. Because once time disappears, it never returns. This idea became one of the central themes of his philosophy, a theme that remains incredibly relevant in a world filled with distraction and constant noise. But Seneca's life was far more complex than most people realize, because his greatest lessons were often forged through the hardships he personally endured. And that is where his story truly begins. Seneca was born around 4 BC in the Roman city of Cordoba, in what is now Spain. From a young age, he showed extraordinary intelligence. He studied rhetoric, philosophy, politics, and quickly became known for his sharp mind and powerful speaking ability. Everything seemed to be moving toward a successful future, but life had other plans. At the height of his early rise, Seneca was accused of a political scandal and sent into exile, far away from Rome, far away from influence, far away from everything he had worked to build. For many people, such a punishment would have destroyed hope. It would have created bitterness, resentment, self-pity. But exile became one of the most important periods of Seneca's life, because adversity forced him to deepen the ideas that would later make him famous. Now think about this carefully. It is easy to talk about resilience when life is comfortable. It is much harder to practice it when everything changes unexpectedly. Seneca suddenly found himself isolated from power, status, and recognition, the very things many people spend their lives pursuing. And during that period, he was forced to confront a difficult truth. How much of his peace depended on external circumstances? This question became central to his philosophy, because Stoicism teaches that true stability cannot depend entirely on conditions outside your control. Wealth can disappear, positions can disappear, reputation can disappear, health can change, life can change overnight. If your peace depends completely on those things, peace becomes fragile. Seneca learned this lesson through direct experience, not through theory, not through books alone, through life itself. And this is why his writings carry so much weight. They were tested under pressure. Now pay attention to something important. Many of the ideas people admire in Seneca today were strengthened during those difficult years. his reflections on suffering, his reflections on uncertainty, his reflections on emotional control, all became deeper because he had lived through hardship personally. Eventually, exile ended. Seneca returned to Rome, but he returned as a different man, more experienced, more reflective, more aware of how quickly external success can disappear. And soon he would find himself closer to power than he had ever imagined. A position that would bring influence, wealth, and one of the most dangerous responsibilities in the entire Roman Empire. After returning from exile, Seneca's life changed dramatically. He was chosen to become the tutor of a young boy who would eventually become one of the most famous rulers in Roman history. That boy was Nero. At the time, nobody could fully predict what the future would bring. Seneca was respected for his intelligence, education, and political experience. He was seen as someone capable of helping shape the character and judgment of a future leader. And for a period of time, it seemed to work. When Nero first became emperor, many historians describe the early years of his reign as relatively stable. Seneca served as one of his closest advisors. His influence reached the highest levels of Roman government. His words helped shape decisions affecting an entire empire. From the outside, this looked like extraordinary success. Power, influence, recognition, wealth, everything many people spend their lives pursuing. But reality was far more complicated, because Seneca soon discovered something important. Wisdom can be taught, but it cannot be forced. And character ultimately belongs to the individual. Now think about this carefully. How many times have intelligent people given good advice that others ignored? How many warnings have been dismissed because pride became stronger than reason? How many lives have changed direction because someone stopped listening? Over time, Nero became increasingly unpredictable. The relationship between emperor and philosopher grew more difficult, and Seneca found himself in a dangerous position. He possessed influence, but not complete control. He could advise, but he could not decide. And slowly, the political environment around him became more unstable. This created a deep tension within Seneca's life. He believed in Stoic principles, self-control, reason, moderation, virtue. Yet he was living inside one of the most powerful and volatile political systems in the world. And this tension still fascinates historians today, because Seneca was not a philosopher observing life from a distance. He was living inside its most dangerous realities. He had to navigate power, ambition, politics, and human weakness every day. And through it all, he continued writing, continued reflecting, continued teaching. His letters and essays became some of the most influential philosophical works ever written, not because they promised perfection, but because they addressed the struggles every human being faces: fear, anger, loss, time, death. Meaning, the questions people still ask today. And as Nero's reign became darker and more unstable, Seneca would soon face the greatest test of his entire life. A test that would reveal whether he truly believed the principles he had spent decades teaching. As the years passed, the political situation in Rome became increasingly dangerous. Nero grew more suspicious, more impulsive, more unpredictable. The empire that once seemed full of promise was changing, and Seneca understood that his influence was fading. He attempted to withdraw from public life. He wanted distance from politics, distance from power, distance from the growing instability surrounding the emperor. But leaving was not so simple. In ancient Rome, proximity to power often came with enormous risks. And eventually, Seneca became caught in one of the most dangerous situations imaginable. He was accused of being connected to a conspiracy against Nero. Whether he was truly involved remains debated by historians. What is certain is that Nero reached a decision. Seneca was ordered to die. There would be no trial, no appeal, no second chance. The philosopher who had spent decades writing about courage, death, and inner peace, was suddenly facing the very thing he had discussed throughout his life. Now think about this carefully. Many people speak confidently about principles when life is comfortable. But what happens when those principles are tested? What happens when fear becomes real? What happens when death is no longer a philosophical idea, but an immediate reality? This was Seneca's final challenge, and according to historical accounts, he faced it with remarkable composure. Not because he wanted to die, not because he felt no fear, but because he had spent years preparing his mind for the realities of life. The Stoics believed that death was part of nature, inevitable, unavoidable, not something to obsess over endlessly. Seneca had written about this many times. He argued that fear of death often causes more suffering than death itself. Now he was being forced to live his own philosophy, and by most historical accounts he did. Witnesses described him remaining calm, speaking with friends, offering final reflections, facing his fate with dignity. Whether every detail of those accounts is perfectly accurate is impossible to know today. But what remains powerful is the example itself, because Seneca's final moments became a symbol of something larger. The idea that philosophy should not merely be studied, it should be lived, especially during difficult moments, especially when circumstances become painful, especially when fear appears. And this is why Seneca continues to inspire people centuries later, not because he claimed to be perfect, but because he tried to align his actions with the principles he taught. And that is far rarer than most people realize. More than 2,000 years have passed since Seneca lived. Empires have risen and fallen. Civilizations have changed. Technology has transformed the world. Yet his words continue reaching new generations. Why? Because the problems Seneca wrote about never disappeared. People still worry about the future, still struggle with anger, still waste time, still chase approval, still fear loss, uncertainty, and failure. The world changed. Human nature did not. That is why Seneca's writings feel surprisingly modern. When he wrote about anxiety, he was describing something millions still experience today. When he wrote about distraction, he was addressing a problem that has only become larger. When he wrote about time, he was discussing a resource people continue wasting without realizing its value. One of his most famous ideas was simple. People protect their money carefully, but often treat their time carelessly. And once time is gone, it never returns. Now think about that for a moment. How many hours disappear every week without purpose? How many years pass while people postpone the things that matter most? How many opportunities are lost because someone assumes there will always be more time? Seneca believed that a meaningful life begins when people become conscious of how they spend their days. Because life is not truly short. People simply waste much of it. This idea remains one of his most influential lessons. But perhaps his greatest contribution goes even deeper. Seneca reminded people that inner peace does not come from controlling the world. It comes from learning how to govern yourself, your thoughts, your reactions, your desires, your character. Because external circumstances will always change. Life will always contain uncertainty, but a disciplined mind can remain steady through much of that chaos. This is why Seneca remains one of the most respected figures in Stoic philosophy. Not because he offered easy answers, not because he promised a perfect life, but because he taught people how to face reality with greater wisdom, courage, and self-control. If this video helped you understand who Seneca was, subscribe to the channel. There's much more ahead about Stoicism, philosophy, personal growth, and the timeless lessons that continue shaping lives today. And remember this one final time. Seneca's greatest lesson may not have been about power, wealth, or success. It may have been this. Life becomes better when you stop trying to control everything around you and start mastering what is within you. Seneca was more than a philosopher. He was a man who lived through power, exile, influence, uncertainty, and danger. He experienced many of the same struggles people face today: fear, loss, ambition, disappointment, the pressure of public life, the uncertainty of the future. And through those experiences, he developed ideas that continue to resonate centuries later. His message was never about escaping reality. It was about facing reality with wisdom, with courage, with self-control. Seneca understood something many people still struggle to accept. Life will never be fully predictable. Circumstances will change, people will change, fortunes will change. But the ability to govern your own mind remains one of the most valuable skills a person can develop. That is why his teachings remain relevant, not because they belong to the past, but because they address timeless human challenges: how to handle adversity, how to use time wisely, how to remain calm under pressure, how to build character, how to live well. If this video helped you discover Seneca and his philosophy, subscribe to the channel. There's much more ahead about Stoicism, great thinkers, timeless wisdom, and practical lessons that still apply in modern life. And remember this one final thought from Seneca's legacy: a person may not control everything that happens in life, but they can always choose how they respond. And that choice can change everything.